A number of years ago, I was employed as a small-town cop in remote northern Australia. The town was a popular tourist spot, but crime was rampant. Breaking and entering and automobile theft was particularly popular. It was about 2 a.m. on a somewhat slow night shift. My partner and I were steadily patrolling the outskirts of our town. The air was still and calm. It was your typical stuffy and humid tropical weather. The car's dispatch radio suddenly crackled to life, startling me. I hear the slightly distorted, matter-of-fact female voice of one of the regular dispatchers. There's something slightly off about the tone of voice. Our dispatchers are amazing under pressure, but you can hear the slightly rushed and breathless delivery of the incoming job. Whatever it is has shaken our seasoned dispatcher. The broadcast is to all units. It comes in as intruders on, which is a shortened version of intruders on premises. The job details are just rolling in, but we don't even hesitate. Intruders on is a priority call. Dispatch fills in as we race to the address. A young woman living alone had cranked up her air conditioner in her bedroom. She then snuggled under a thick doona for the night and texted her cousin for a bit before falling asleep. She woke, feeling something was off, to see a figure of a man standing in her room, watching her. Amazingly, she did not scream or give off a reaction that she was awake. She shifted as if she was still sleeping and curled up further under the covers. She then blindly felt around for the mobile phone that she had discarded on her bed earlier that evening. Under the covers of the thick doona, she texted her cousin about the man standing in her room. Her cousin was the one on the phone conveying everything to our call takers. The victim was conveying that the man was simply standing by her bed during the minutes that we were taking to get there. She could occasionally hear his breathing and movement when he shifted. We debated turning our red and blue lights on, but declined for fear of the intruder panicking and trying to hurt her. We got there a heartbeat after the other unit. In the darkness, I can make out the other two officers moving around the front of the house. As our car screeched to a stop, the headlights catch the man fleeing from the far side of the house. He's barefoot and pounding across the driveway when our guys on foot spot him. We join the chase. The bloke is overweight and doesn't get far running down the road barefoot. We nab him, and I'm surprised at how normal he looks. He's a bit scruffy, bogan and unkempt, but pretty average. He later admitted that he likes breaking into women's home to watch them sleeping. The crime made him feel powerful, and he enjoyed invading other people's privacy and violating their sense of safety. He refused to disclose his other actions, but it was obvious that this had been going on for a while. Okay, so I'm a male, and about 11 years ago, when I was 8 years old, and my family, mom, dad, brother, as well as my brother's girlfriend who was living with us at the time, went on a holiday to Australia to visit some relatives on my mum's side of the family. They lived in the rural parts of Victoria, and to give a basic summary of the area, they lived on a farm. The house was surrounded by various fields. When facing the house on the left side, there were 2 fields, and then at the far end of these fields, there was a highly wooded area with a dirt track running through it. My grandparents, the relatives that lived here, would often go on nature rambles through the forest to spot the wildlife that lived within there. My mother, being a dedicated bird spotter, decided to head off with me and Lisa, my brother's girlfriend, into the forest, as we both had a fascination with wildlife. We must have been walking along the dirt track for about 10 minutes, taking pictures of the various animals that we'd seen. We passed by a line of motorbikes and around 7 bikers having a barbecue. One of the bikers politely smiled at my mother, and she responded with a simple, "Good evening." As we walked past them, one of the bikers approached us and asked where we were going. We told them, and they informed us that they had been camping in this area for around 2 nights. They told us to be careful as people had been shooting game in the forest. These people apparently had aggressive dogs, so we were told to be careful. About 15 minutes later, I'd spotted an old barn, which I dashed off to explore, being the adventurous child that I was, while my mother and Lisa observed a bird of some kind. I didn't tell them where I was going. As I approached the barn, I saw 3 large dogs tied up outside. They were Rottweilers and they seemed incredibly aggressive. They were on chains and barking and snarling a lot. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed they were for hunting, but looking back, Rottweilers aren't hunting dogs. There was also an old mattress on the floor outside which appeared to be covered in brown stains and emanated a foul aroma. I was around 3 feet away from the mattress, but the smell was unbelievably powerful. As I was going to turn around to return to the others, I saw a man emerging from the barn. The image of this man is one of the few things I remember clearly from this day. He was very tall, about 6'4", and was wearing a blue pinstriped suit. The strangest thing about him was that he was wearing a large top hat. His clothes seemed very worn, and his face, the parts of it that weren't covered by a large brown beard, were red, as if he had been working out on a hot day. I remember the man smiled and approached me. I asked him if he was a magician, to which he said,
"No, I look after doggies. Do you like dogs?"
I told him I did. This is when things started to get weird. He began to approach me and asked me if I wanted to come inside and have a picture taken of me with the dogs. I politely refused and said that my mum would be looking for me. He grabbed my hand lightly and said it would take only a second. At that point, I heard my mum shouting to the man, demanding to know what he was doing. She had come looking for me. The man simply let go and just stared at her. She asked him again, in which he continued to just blankly stare. He didn't say a word. My mum immediately grabbed my arm, and me, her and Lisa walked as quickly as possible back to the entrance. We got about halfway there when I turned around and told my mother that the magician was following us. She turned around and, sure enough, he was power walking behind us. My mum screamed at me and asked what he wanted. He didn't reply, again, simply continued power walking towards us. At that point, my mum began walking even faster to the point that she was dragging me along. The next part of the story is mostly a blur to me. I remember my mum gasping, picking me up and sprinting full pelt with me while screaming for help. My mum tells me that the man had begun running towards us and managed to grab my leg. She said that Lisa jumped on the man's back and scratched all across his face before he threw her on the floor. My mum apparently kicked the man in the testicles, grabbed Lisa off of the ground, and ran with me over her shoulder. I remember we slowed down shortly afterwards and stopped to catch our breath. We continued walking, only for the magician to all of a sudden appear from the brush area. My mum began to panic and started running with me again. The man was sprinting after us. We have no idea what the hell he wanted. We were nearing the area where the bikers were camping and my mum screamed for help. Immediately, 2 bikers emerged from the trees nearby and my mum screamed, "That man tried to kidnap my son!" The magician, having seen the 2 bikers, immediately turned around and bolted in the other direction, the direction that he came from. One of the bikers pursued him, but unfortunately the magician had a head start. I remember the bikers were incredibly nice, and I soon forgot about the strange man after one of the bikers let me sit up front on his motorbike, while my mum and Lisa went in the sidecar. The guy took us into the nearest town and dropped us off at the police station where my mum filed a report. After that, he gave us all a lift back home, which was really nice. I never got to thank him at the time as I didn't really understand the situation. But on the off chance that you're listening to this, Mr. Biker, I want to say thank you. As for the magician, whose intentions for me I'm unsure of, I hope I never see you again. This is my mom and dad's story. It was their honeymoon. They married in August 1980 in Australia, and they were driving along the Bruce Highway into a city called Rockhampton in Queensland. It was late at night, around 8 p.m-ish, and they'd been driving most of the day. There is a very long stretch of road before you come into the city that is just bush, kilometers of it. At night the bush can be very scary. They'd not passed cars for some time, probably an hour or 2. Out of nowhere, headlights appeared along a highway behind them in their rearview mirror. That's fine, whatever. They keep driving as normal. Then the headlights start getting closer and closer. Dad is driving and says something along the lines of, What a bloody turkey. Look how fast he's driving. The car comes right up to them, with their high beams on, and follows them for about 5 minutes like that. Mum and Dad have a conversation about why can't the person just overtake them. And then the car completely backs off, like slows right down almost to a complete stop, and hangs back about 1 to 2 kilometers away for a good 10 to 15 minutes. Mum and Dad both think that was super weird and creepy, but whatever. They just keep driving. Then the car speeds up again, tailgating, high beam, and sort of swerving into the other lane as if to overtake them. This goes on for another 5 minutes-ish. Mum and Dad are both really scared now. Remember, this is the days before mobiles and cell phones. And besides, there would have been no reception in that area to call for help even if they had them. It's not over yet. The car backs off again, but not as far as before. The car hangs back there for about a minute before hitting the gas and absolutely flying past Mum and Dad and finally overtaking them. There appeared to be one person in the car, but they couldn't really see what they looked like. There was also no number plate on the car to identify it. And I know Dad has told me heaps of time before, but I can't really remember what sort of car it was now. I felt like it was some sort of a sedan, definitely white. The car disappears up the road, as if it was never there. Mum and Dad are shaken to their core, but pleased that it was seemingly over. Not done yet. The road now becomes a bit more windy. Previously it was almost straight. Mum and Dad come around a corner and the car is parked in the middle of the road, facing them, high beams on, both driver and passenger doors wide open, and the man, they could now see that it was a man, standing in front of the car with his arms spread wide. Spread as if to make them stop their car. Mum was screaming at Dad, "Just hit him, don't stop, just hit him." And my dad, being the bloody hero that he is, did not stop and drove around the man's car on the right hand side of it, which would be the passenger side as it was parked facing them. The man tried to get in front of Dad as he made this maneuver but couldn't quite get there in time. I assume he was trying to stop him from driving off. He was very close to their car and Dad nearly hit him. Dad absolutely floored it. He said he was going around 130 to 140 kilometers per hour to get away from the man. They're not sure how long they drove like that, but they didn't slow back down to the speed limit until they started to come into the city limits. They made it to their hotel and parked the car at the back of the hotel so that you couldn't see it from the road because it was on the side of the highway and passing traffic could see the cars parked there. Mum was quite hysterical and told the reception lady what had just happened. They called the police and reported it but never found the car or the driver. Nearly done. Fast forward many years later, Mum was watching the news and Ivan Milat had just been arrested. Mum screamed and called Dad into the lounge room. They both agreed that it was the man they saw. They were absolutely adamant. And in case you don't know who Ivan Milat is, he's one of the most notorious serial killers in Australian history. I can't find evidence to suggest that Ivan Milat was active in Queensland during that time, but I certainly won't call Mum and Dad liars because of what they saw. I imagine he could have been a creepy hillbilly who looked very similar to Mr. Backpacker Murderer. This encounter takes place several years ago in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a bit of background, I'm a pretty well built 6'2" dude and I was around 26 years old at the time. Now, onto the story. I was on a road trip with a mate, travelling around the central Queensland outback in my old semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both science and zoology nerds and had heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of 3 areas, Winton, Richmond and Hughenden. There have been previous dino bone discoveries, still have fossils, as well as a seriously awesome dinosaur track with preserved footprints. We were staying at a place 3 hours from Winton for a couple of days, and we're pretty keen to check out this trail. So we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 AM the next morning, car parked with lunch, several liters of water, and my crusty GPS, and off we went. It was a long drive, and halfway through, my aircon decided to cock it. If any of you live in or have visited Australia in the summer, you would know it's brutally hot. So, I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip there without aircon, with the eventuality of the 6-hour round trip, was hell. To make matters worse, my GPS also stopped working as the map's software didn't recognize the area we were in. Luckily, I had an old Rifidex in my backseat, but it was pretty tough to revert to map reading when you're used to computer screen telling you where to go, especially given we're talking the Australian outback here, complete with dirt tracks for roads and very limited signage. But I digress. Finally, we make it to the trail and kick around there for a couple of hours. Not gonna lie, it was pretty awesome. Then, we decided to make the trip back as it was starting to get late in the afternoon and we didn't want to be driving back in the dark. As we were about to leave, this gnarly old guy, who appeared to be an employee of the trail company, dressed all in khaki camouflage gear, asked us about where we were from and where we were heading. He gave me the stink eye when I was vague with the details, but my mate told him the name of the town we were staying. He took a real liking to my mate, and he laughed when he told him about our lengthy journey in. Apparently, we had taken the long route, and there was a much quicker way to get back that would shave about an hour off the trip. We jumped at the directions he gave us. Ain't nobody got time for an extra hour in an airconless oven, which we wrote down. Off we went on our merry way, thinking how lucky we were to have met this old dude who gave us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. But I can't deny there was definitely a creep vibe coming off of him. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in an area I had never been in, and eventually settled straight on this narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection about half an hour, take a right and continue on that road until we got to a main highway that would take us back. After an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail though, we still hadn't reached this intersection. I was starting to freak out a bit, thinking we'd missed a turn, but my mate was completely chilled out and was sure that we'd get there eventually. I think he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there, man, and those things are seriously dangerous if you hit one. We'd been traveling for a while now. It was getting later and later in the day, and it got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads, or cars in sight, and I was really not comfortable with where this was headed. The middle of nowhere, in a remote area in the wasteland that is the Australian outback. There weren't even any trees, only this dirt road and desolate, dry bush and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I stop the car and tell my mates to get the binoculars out of the back to have a look around in case we can see a landmark. Yes, I carried binoculars in my car, still do. He obliges and can just about make out a house-like structure not too far in the distance, so we made the decision to head for that. We figured it could be a house, and maybe the people would be nice enough to give us some petrol to top us up and some better directions out here. As we neared this structure, it became apparent that it was not a house at all. We pulled out front and see that it's an old caravan that has been burnt to a shell from the inside out. And it's still got 3 blackened partial walls up though, so we can't see all the way in. And it looks like someone's been there recently because there are animal bones strung up all over the place and a cow's skull at the entrance to the caravan. Some of the animal bone things even have grass or horsehair woven into them, and they were arranged like decorations. Then we see this hand-painted sign that has been staked into the ground with the words "Moonlight Motel" on it. My alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friend to say, let's get the fuck out of here, and he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car, coming in the direction we had just come from. Would have been only about 10 minutes behind us the entire time we were driving, but I didn't see it once. It's kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it's coming towards us, fast. It's at this point that we both hear this creepy scratching sound coming from the burned out caravan, like someone is scratching at the wall from inside. I move a little closer to try and see what it is, and there is a person in there peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. Then, this childlike voice that is obviously a grown man imitating a little girl giggles and says, "Are you here to play with me?" My mate and I both look at each other and book it out of there, back to the inner sanctum of the X-Trail. Just as I'm about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind my car with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way, so I can't reverse out from where I'm stationed. I have no choice but to drive forward and turn around that way, narrowly missing the staked motel sign. As we're turning to leave, the driver starts blaring the horn, just hammering it for no reason at all. I just speed off back in the direction that we came, and the other car doesn't follow. It's getting to twilight at this stage, and pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads once it's dark because of the kangaroo situation. But we're feeling a bit better as we manage to navigate our way back to where we came from, the Dino Trail, and even start to joke around about what happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention to help with the directions or something. I pull into the parking lot and go to the front desk area of the company that runs the tours. I explained that we had gotten lost on our way back to the town we were staying at, and the lady there is kind enough to give us just enough petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself, and mentioned to her that her workmate is a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. We figured there was no way we'd messed up the advice that he'd given us. And she gives me a weird look and asks me to describe the guy. I do, and her face goes funny and she says, "That man does not work here. I saw him talking with the other tourists today, and my boss had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get the details of where people were staying and telling them that he had vacancies at his place and they could stay there. The Moonlight Motel?" So, creepy old dude pretending to give helpful directions to a couple of city folk to trap and potentially murder them in your lovely accommodation, the Moonlight Motel. Let's not meet.